In the last review, I set out to familiarise myself with the GameCube's library by looking at Mario Sunshine. Today I'm following through with that by looking at another GameCube classic. This game, unlike Sunshine, is more of a cult hit. It does have its following, no doubt, but it doesn't have the most vocal fan base in the world. Today's game is Pikmin, a weird little real-time strategy game. I was very skeptical going into this game. I mean, I've dabbled in strategy-based games in the past, but none of them have really grabbed me like other games, you know. Usually I just find myself being overwhelmed or just straight up bored a couple hours in. So, was this game any different? And how did I find it? Well, let me tell you. Holy fuck. This game seems to do everything right. It blew me away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me break this game down and explain how and why it's so good, starting with the story.
Pikmin is a game starring this cute little guy. His name's Olimar, and while flying through space, Olimar's ship, the SS Dolphin, gets bodied by a fucking asteroid.
Oh hey, I'm just about to go to bed.
Leaving Olimar stranded on this weird planet, presumed to be Earth in the future, albeit with fictional fauna. After exploring the impact site a little, Olimar discovers a weird space pod, which he dubs an onion. The onion immediately sprouts up and releases a tiny plant-like being, which Olimar decides to call a Pikmin, because it resembles his favourite kind of pick carrots.
It's a pretty simple plot, which I think is a good thing. In a game like this, the story should be borderline non-existent to prioritise the gameplay, but still give you something to work towards. In this instance, you're working towards getting all of the parts to Olimar's ship back, so he can get back to his home planet.
You only get 30 days to do this, by the way, which may sound like more than enough, with you being able to get a part a day and then be done with it. But it's a lot harder than it sounds, especially for a new player. I mean, look at my original save. So you really have to be good at figuring out ways to progress through the area you're in, and finding the best route on the fly, as well as pre-planning your next move between days.
The Pikmin being the namesake of this game are obviously an integral part of that strategy, so that leads me on to the question of what the Pikmin can actually do.
The Pikmin can be used by Olimar for a number of things, namely fighting enemies and carrying items back to Olimar's ship or their respective onion. There are also 3 different kinds of Pikmin, all with their own unique abilities. Red Pikmin, which are the strongest and are immune to fire, yellow Pikmin, which are the fastest and can be thrown higher than other Pikmin, as well as being able to wield these bomb rocks, and finally blue Pikmin, which are basically the all-arounders with the ability to swim.
While making this video, I had 3 playthroughs, and in each one I ended up gravitating to a different colour of Pikmin. This was completely unintentional, but now looking back, it kind of makes me realise how many layers of replayability this game has.
Let's start with the difficulty and learning curve of the game. While I feel like these things are hard to articulate to someone, the best way I could describe them both is perfect yet insane. The game doesn't mess around with the difficulty. By the time you get the blue Pikmin, you've been put through the ringer, and if you haven't by then, you're about to be. The difficulty doesn't necessarily spike, but it definitely climbs right under the player's nose, and if they're not prepared, the game will chew them up and spit them out. Personally, going into this game as blind as possible, that's exactly what happened to me. Now you could chalk that up to my lack of experience with the real-time strategy genre, but I feel like a lot of the difficulty came from the flow and progression of the game. By day 2 you're fighting bullbobs, both big and small, and are presented with branching pathways. And while that sounds like a good thing, mainly because it is, you're presented with big challenges and obstacles, which can stump a newcomer significantly.
This kind of leaves a newcomer scrambling for time, trying to figure stuff out on the fly as mentioned before. This is where one of the game's main focuses comes into play. Time management.
It goes without saying that time management is a huge part of this real-time strategy game, but it is. And I now realise I'm probably making this game sound a lot more unforgiving than it actually is. Rest assured this game is very forgiving, but isn't for the faint of heart because it's crushing when you lose Pikmin, especially a large amount of them. The game, in general, can be pretty ruthless, but it's never too discouraging because you can always bounce back from losing Pikmin or wasting a day or 2. Once you get good at the game, you can basically beat the game in about 20 in-game days, maybe even less if you're that good. There is a bit of a learning curve as mentioned before with all of the different routes you can take, but the level design is great, so after your first or second visit to an area, you should have a good idea of where you're going and what you're doing. The levels are usually laid out in an open-ended fashion, giving the player a good deal of freedom. So if you do somehow get stuck at a certain part, you can always go back to a different area and get any parts you may have missed.
There's also a learning curve to the controls, like why the fuck did they feel the need to map the camera control to the L trigger? I mean, I guess I got used to it, but What the fuck?
Speaking of the controls and the learning curve surrounding the game, let's talk about controlling the Pikmin. I don't know if I just fucking suck, but oftentimes I could come ever so close to a body of water, and my red and yellow Pikmin would jump in to commit suicide like I had some 2012 cursed creepypasta version of the game or something. Now I don't have footage of this because my broadcast doesn't have a capture device, but take my word for it, sometimes the Pikmin would just run all over the place and do whatever they wanted.
Now this wasn't a common problem of course, but it was there, so I thought I should mention it.
Fret not though, because even if this happens to you, you're safe, because for the most part the Pikmin control really well. The controls are pretty precise. I've heard it's even more precise with the Wii version, but fuck that, I'm not your retarded grandma, I ain't playing no Wii. But going back to my point about replayability, getting over this learning curve and using the techniques at your disposal, and getting better with them with every subsequent playthrough, plays a big part in the replayability factor of this game. Side note, I also ran into some issues with the Pikmin AI, but for the most part it was flawless, so it's really just a personal nitpick if anything. The presentation of this game kinda leaves something to be desired in my eyes. The models are pretty great. I love all of the character designs too. Every creature from the Pikmin to the Wollywogs are excellently designed. But goddamn man, what the fuck are these textures? They're not horrible, but even for the time, they look muddy and washed out. A lot of the environments are drab too, but they work really well for the atmosphere the game's trying to create. So, it gets a pass from me. The soundtrack on the other hand? Ooh boy, I sure do love this soundtrack. It's nice and tranquil and it really helps the player relax during the more tasking and challenging segments of the game. It's almost ambient and atmospheric at points. I really dig its laid back vibe. Everything about this game is super laid back. The progression, the presentation, even the fucking boss battles. Bar the final area, there's no real boss stages or anything like that. The bosses don't feel like bosses. They're kinda just incorporated into the level. You kinda just walk into a part of the area you're in and, oh, here comes a boss. It sounds a lot more intense than it really is. It's actually a lot more chill if anything, because the boss battles feel like they hold less weight than they actually do. Even the story is chill. I know I said there wasn't really much of a story, which is true, but in between days you're given a little more context, and I guess what you could call an expansion on the lore. Between days, Olimar will talk about what he's accomplished and discovered, and will even occasionally reminisce about his family and stuff, giving him a bit of character development. It's a really cute and subtle way to flesh out the story and lore of the Pikmin universe, while keeping the laid-back style of the game intact.
And that's just it. This game prioritizes a level of calmness and tranquility, which is really weird for a real-time strategy game. But it really works. I couldn't recommend this game enough. Sure, it shows its age, but from the gameplay to the level of replayability, you'd be a fool to not pick this game up, or at least give it a go. Anyway guys, that's enough out of me. I've been XYZCruncher. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to leave a like, subscribe, share, do all that good shit, because it really helps me get that one step closer to being able to do this as a job, which is ultimately what I want. I meant to release this video last week, but I've actually been down with the corona. You could probably tell with the with the sound of my voice, it's probably a bit off, and yeah, it was pretty dreadful. But I'm bouncing back now. I'm getting better. I've been quarantining, which is good. But yeah, I should be back to a regular schedule soon. I'm going to make this a series of reviews, so I'm going to review all the Pikmin games. But yeah, that's basically all out of me. I might be moving soon, so if the upload schedule shakes up a bit, that's why. But I'm not sure if I'm moving yet. But yeah, I should be. But yeah, that's enough. That's enough out of me. I've been talking long enough. I've been XYZCruncher. Stay cool, stay safe, stay crunchy, and I'm out. Peace.